Well, here we are, the very first episode of my podcast. It's been a long time coming, but we finally made it. Just so you know what to expect, I hate boxes, but I love guns, and everything else is added value. Make of that what you will. I'm just here to talk about the things that interest me, and hopefully they'll interest you too. Clearly, there will be a lot of gun talk on this podcast for obvious reasons, but believe me when I tell you that everything is on the table. Anyway, I hate when shows have unnecessarily long intros, so let's get to the first episode. All right, so Tracy, thanks for joining me. Really quickly for the people that are watching and the people that are listening, kind of just give me a brief kind of history about your background and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Tracey Wilson, and I live in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, which is the capital city of our country. I am a licensed gun owner. Up here in Canada, we've got some pretty strict gun regulations. I've been a gun owner for well over 20 years, an accomplished big game hunter, and a competitive sports shooter. I'm a mom of two wonderful girls and a grandma to a little 7-year-old guy who loves getting out to the range with Nanny. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, and I'm the Canadian Gun Lobby. So I'm one of only 2 registered Canadian gun lobbyists. So,
okay. Yeah. And so I hadn't really been familiar with, the way the gun lobby in Canada works compared to the one in the U.S. In the U.S. you have, of course, you have NRA, and then you have a bunch of other gun lobbies that are smaller, just as important, but, everyone knows NRA. Right. Do they have the same type of, what's the outlook, generally speaking, from the people in Canada to the to the Canadian gun lobby? Is it the same dynamic that you see here in America, where people look at the NRA as the big bad evil wolf, or any other group that does Second Amendment advocacy?
Yes, of course. So those who know me, of course, know I'm a reasonable, rational person. I'm well versed in the topic. I just want fair, effective legislation for gun owners and credible work on crime. So it's kind of twofold, right?
Uh-huh.
In fact, we've been working quite a bit with actual victims groups and working with RCMP to develop programming that might stop some of the things that are in our lane, such as straw purchasing at retailers, things like that, right? So we're cooperatively working to ensure that Canadians stay safe. So although we do get demonized by the anti-gun lobbies, which there are many of them, and they're quite established and well-funded, it's not at all true. So Gotcha. They call us that all the time, NRA North. In fact, Justin Trudeau sent out an email calling us that in a fundraiser during the election. And it pretty much backfired for him, because anybody who knows us knows we're just good, salt of the earth people who have gone through the rigorous process of becoming a licensed gun owner in Canada. And we just want to practice our sport safely and without being bothered.
Gotcha. So Canada has an interesting history when it comes to gun laws. So in 89, you had a major shooting, which was the worst shooting prior to the shooting that just took place not too long ago. What were Canadian gun laws like before the 1989 shooting?
Well, I mean, we've had some pretty strict gun control well before that. But of course, with the Polytechnique shooting, which was a targeted mass shooting at a college in Quebec, that targeted strictly women. They did bring in some new regulations and restrictions. And of course, gun laws in particular have been compounding and becoming more complex and more robust ever since then. Of course, none of that does anything to stop the actual crime.
Yeah.
We've seen legal gun owner numbers rising huge in Canada, and yet crime levels sort of dropping. And of course, our entire country is already on, we're struggling. We're on lockdown like the rest of the globe, trying to deal with this pandemic. And then, of course, just recently, a few days ago, in fact, out in Nova Scotia, which is in East Coast Maritime Province, there was a terrible, tragic, horrific, planned, premeditated, awful tragedy that did result in the highest number of victims in a mass shooting here in Canada.
Gotcha.
So
now, I did a video on it where I basically said, this shooting proves essentially that the ultimate goal of gun control is to pretty much ban guns outright. And I said that because in '89 you had the shooting, and then you guys had a highly they made the gun laws even more strict. And now you have this shooting here. And I'm pretty sure they said the same thing then that they're probably going to try to say now, which was, we're going to make we're going to make the gun laws more strict so that this never happens again.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And so,
like, they had not even recovered all of the victims' bodies yet. Mm-hmm. And the anti-gun lobbies were in full force. It was, 24 hours after the rampage started, they wrote an open letter to the Prime Minister, demanding gun bans. And it's crazy because we did find out yesterday that the shooter was not a licensed gun owner. He had illicit firearms. It's still to be determined where he got them, but it wasn't through any regulated process here in the country. So they continue to do that same thing, though, is still overregulate the people not committing the crime and completely avoid it. So
do they know what type of gun he used?
Well, they know, but they haven't told us.
Gotcha.
So,
but he wasn't.
He also took firearms off of one of his victims was an RCMP officer. So that's our federal police force. He dragged a female officer out of her car, executed her in the middle of the road, and took her firearms and her magazines and her car.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is this, I generally don't even like to politicize stuff like this. I really don't. But the problem is the other side, what they'll do, which is really interesting. Something will happen, and they'll politicize it. But because in their minds they think, well, we're not politicizing it. We just want to save lives. So you're politicizing it because you just want to keep your evil, dirty guns. And from that standpoint, I look at it as like, no, it's not just about me having a fetish for my firearms. It's about me having the ability to protect myself. Like, that is a core tenet of U.S. firearm ownership. Is that same mentality prevalent in Canada the same way?
Well, no. I mean, surprisingly, the whole idea of defending your life or defending the lives of those in your charge is completely frowned upon. Now, we do legally in our in the criminal code do have a right to protect our life, but of course we don't have a right to carry a firearm. Mm-hmm. It would boil down to somebody breaking into your house, you being able to access your unloaded, locked, properly legally stored firearms, accessing your locked ammunition, and trying to figure that out as he's running up the stairs to kill you, right?
Yeah. You
have no opportunity out in the public, unfortunately, to defend your life in that manner. And for me, as a woman who I travel a lot for work, I spend a lot of time and late nights sometimes out in the downtown cores of our biggest cities. Mm. And for me, it's terrifying to think that even just the thought that I would have the audacity to want to defend my life, it blows my mind that that's how it's thought of, right? It's demonized constantly.
Why do you think? Where do you think the difference comes from? I have my reasons why I think it is, but from somebody living in Canada, why do you think there isn't the same level of importance placed on the idea of being able to protect yourself with a firearm to the same degree that there is in here in the U.S.?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with, I think Canada's, traditional idea of firearms was, hunting. I mean, our country wasn't founded in the same manner, right?
Gotcha.
It was kind of founded a little more peacefully. And of course, we look at, hunting and foraging for food. And this is, even now, it's very politically accepted and publicly accepted if you wanted to hunt, right? People say, well, you don't need an AR-15 because you can't hunt with it.
Yeah.
Well, the only reason you can't hunt with an AR-15 here is because you said I can't. Yeah. We used to be able to. So
gotcha.
It's just a strange thing. And they think that, I've had anti-gun advocates tell me that the idea that I would want to carry a firearm to protect myself is so absurd because I might be disarmed by my assailant and give him the upper hand. Well, I spent a lot of time at the range and I'd like to take my chances. Right?
The irony behind that is, well, then isn't that what just happened here? Right. Would that not make the case for having cops not having guns? But that idea would be preposterous to them, right?
Well, and here's the thing. In this shooting in particular, the type of gun or how he sourced it or the gun itself actually is irrelevant because the most effective weapon he had was he had a legitimate RCMP uniform. So that's our federal police. Uh-huh. He had a cruiser that he had bought at a police auction. So when the cars that the police use are a couple of years old, they auction them off to the public. They decommission them and take all the decals off and all the gadgets that make it a police car. But he had the ability and the resources to turn it right back into a police car. And then, he went on this killing rampage, knocking on doors and shooting people, pulling people over on the highway and murdering them and executing them.
That's an interesting thing I want to point out is, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you spoke on it recently, and you talked about the having to go and unlock your firearm, then get your bullets out of storage, then actually put the bullets in the gun. He was going door to door, as well as shooting people on the streets as he was driving, but he was going door to door and shooting people. Yeah. And if I'm at home and I have a firearm, and this kind of speaks to the whole idea of having lost for storage, right? Like how you store your firearms, because in America, that's something that's being brought up more frequently. And on the surface, a lot of people think, oh, it makes perfect sense. Just make sure your firearms are stored and locked away. Make them as locked away as possible, because we want to keep the kids safe. We don't want kids getting in firearms and so forth. And that's a noble reason why. However, what's not talked about is how that makes it how hard it makes it for someone to then utilize the firearm for the very reason why they have it in the first place, which is to defend themselves. And if this guy were to come to the door, I'm not going to be able to say, stop, hold on for a second. Let me go to the back. Let me unlock my gun. Let me get my ammunition, put it in the gun, and then come back and we can have this conversation. Like that's just not feasible. So it stands to reason that the storage laws actually make it more unsafe for people who have firearms than it does make it safe for them.
Well, our radical left-leaning liberal government is actually toying with the idea of what they call central storage. Mm-hmm. And that would mean, so we have different classifications of firearms here. Quickly, a non-restricted firearm would be basically something you would use for hunting. So either a shotgun or a hunting rifle. Yeah. Restricted would be handguns and ARs, and prohibited, very few have them. We're not allowed. They're prohibited. So our restricted firearms, we're not allowed to use those out in the back 40 or, out in the country somewhere. They are only legally allowed to be discharged at a range. So the Liberals' idea is, well, if you can only use them at the range, maybe you should be storing them at the range. But of course, in a country of this size with this much wilderness, I live in a very urban center. I live in the capital of the city, of the country. And my range consists of 12 acres out in the bush, with some snow fence around it and a shack. We got a lock on the gate. There's no electricity. There's no cameras. There's no security. Yeah. And we got, 40,000 handguns between the members. You want us to throw them in a shed in the bush? Like, come on. Yeah. I mean, there's got to be some common sense when we think about this. And the other point I wanted to make is, even with this guy knocking on people's doors, with the intent to kill them, they wouldn't know that. They'd look out the window, see an RCMP cruiser, a cop in a uniform, and think, oh, the officers are here, right? And they'd open the door and be murdered, which is exactly what happened.
That is very true. That is very true. Mm-hmm. And like you pointed out, that's actually what made it most dangerous, was the fact that he had access to the police car and a police uniform and had the ability to basically catch people off guard.
100%.
I've actually stated that in a couple of videos where I talk about, people like to talk about the lethality of a particular mass shooting based on the firearm used. Well, if we look at, let's take America, for instance, and we take our most deadly shootings that we've had in America, they weren't so deadly simply because this person had a particular firearm. It was a context and a circumstance in which they committed the act. So if we take, for instance, what happened in Las Vegas, the reason why it was so deadly was because you had an ongoing concert with people trapped in a very small area where he could literally centralize all of his fire. Take for instance, the Virginia Tech shooting, where he literally went to the school, chained the door shut, walked into a classroom, locked the door. He was the only person with a firearm, and no one else in the room had a firearm. So he basically had free reign of the entire classroom, where he could pretty much kill at will without being contested by anyone else that had a firearm. So that's what made it more deadly, is the circumstance and the context in which the shooting happened, not so much the firearm. But we tend to overly focus on the firearm and say, oh no, this is bad. But we look at Timothy McVeigh and what he did with a bomb. Yeah. Right.
Interestingly enough, too, just to not to cut you off, but today actually happens to be the second anniversary of one of Canada's most tragic mass killings. Mm-hmm. And that is, of course, the van attack in Toronto. So 2 years ago in Toronto, our biggest city here in Canada, there was a lunatic who rented a van from U-Haul, went off his rocker, drove down the road, driving into people as they're running, chasing them over sidewalks, and slaughtered 10 people and put 16 in the hospital.
There you go. And it's funny you bring it up because I bring up Nice when that attack where he killed 81 people with a truck.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, think about that. And people like to talk about the lethality of the firearm. And I get it. I'm not going to argue the merits of why the firearm is not an effective tool, because then that makes it less effective for me to defend myself with. But this idea that we're going to ban certain types of guns and it's going to make us more safe, it's naive at best and evil at worst, as far as I'm concerned. Because it's this odd dynamic where this guy, I don't know the entire background and history that he had, but he wasn't a Navy. He wasn't a military. Was he a military guy that you know of?
No, he was a denturist.
Exactly. So somehow a AR-15 in the hands of a denturist, right, when he wants to kill someone, makes him this amazing mass killer. But an AR-15 in the hands of someone like you who wants it for protection, oh, you're incapable. They'll just end up taking the gun away from you. And that boggles my mind. It's like, so you become a lethal assassin when you have a gun because you want to kill a bunch of people, but you become an incapable idiot when you want to have a gun for protection.
Right.
It's a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah. Well, it is an interesting dynamic. And sometimes, especially this morning, I was reading the newspaper and reading about the, there's an online vigil tonight for the van attack. And, some people are talking about the Boston Marathon bombing. And I always think to myself, as much as they demonize firearms ownership and the role that it plays in violence, it also plays a significant role in stopping violence. When you've got somebody with, a 10,000 pound vehicle driving through the streets, smashing into people, killing them, they're the quickest, most efficient way to eliminate that threat, of course, would be a firearm.
Exactly. So let's talk about some of the. So we kind of talked about the culture of firearms in Canada. With respect to advocacy, what's some of the biggest challenges that you all face in Canada that here in America we don't necessarily face? Because we talked about it a little bit when I talked to you on the phone about, I personally think that the task that you guys have is a lot harder than what we have in America, because we have a basis for why we have the right to own firearms that you all don't have. And so it's almost like we have a perfect fallback here in America. It's like even if you somehow manage to stump the brilliance of all the gun owners in the country, we always can fall back on, well, it's our inherent right? And that's because, like you kind of alluded to, is our country, we fought for our freedom. Like we've spilled blood for our freedom here in America. And so we understand the importance of firearms to a large extent. Now, a lot of the newer generation of people are so far removed from it, they don't see the importance. But from a Canadian perspective, talk to me a little bit about that dynamic, because I do think you guys have it a lot harder when it comes to arguing the points of why, especially like, why do you need an AR-15? Like for us, it's like, well, it's the fight of a tyrannical government. You can't say that. Y'all don't have a Second Amendment.
Right. Well, that is literally the hardest job ever. I mean, I've had some difficult jobs in my career, but just for reflection, my husband's a combat veteran, and he's retired now, and he served for 22 years. But he also, now that he's retired, got some time on his hands. He's a great advocate for veterans and for PTSD. And, sometimes we talk about our advocacy, and I'm like, dude, you have the easiest job in the world. Everybody loves veterans. Yeah. Everyone wants to see you do well. Everyone loves you. I'm trying to get average, everyday Canadians that are scared of everything to understand why I want to have handguns and AR-15s, right? So it is incredibly difficult. A lot of it comes back to education, right? I always say the anti-gunners try to Americanize the debate, and that's not in a negative way. It's just they look at Hollywood, and you've got movies with, people spraying and praying and, shooting like crazy, and they're like, oh, we don't want that here in Canada. Meanwhile, even if I own an AR-15, we do not have full auto. It's semi-auto, and it's relegated to 5 rounds. That's the maximum I can have in it. Same as my hunting rifle. And when I tell them that and I explain to them why I like it, I'm a tiny little person. I like a gun that's customizable. I also I can hand it to one of my daughters who may be of a different size than me. I've got a little tiny one. just joined the forces and an older daughter. We can each use it and customize it. When I explain it to them or when I bring them to the range and show them, then they understand.
Gotcha.
So education is going to be the key. And we're actually verging, possibly today or maybe tomorrow, on launching a huge national advocacy campaign that we've been working on for quite a while, since the last election. And then, of course, kind of got put on hold with the shutdown with the virus and everything. There was a public element to it, which, of course, we'll have to wait for better times. But we've got this huge online platform coming, and there will be zero excuse for anybody in Canada to not be educated. And that doesn't go for just average Canadians. Our legislators, our law enforcement, and our media don't have a clue what the laws are.
So they're just as dumb about firearms as the vast majority of our politicians here are, essentially.
Yeah, we had an interview. There's a link out today. I shared it on social media, and they interviewed Wendy Sukier from the Coalition for Gun Control. She's kind of our big anti-gunner here.
So she's
been around.
She's the Shannon Watts. She's your Shannon Watts, essentially.
I'm sure they're friends. Yeah. And Carol Baskin too. But I had to do it. I had to.
I just started watching it, and I'm like, this chick is naughty. Yeah.
Well, she, in her interview today, she talked about the danger of the AR-15 platform and how it should be banned because it has a pistol grip. It can come in different colors, and you can have a trigger guard. So this is far more dangerous than any other rifle that simply would be rested on top of your shoulder. And I'm like,
because of the color.
You know what?
So she's
us gun people are just like,
racist,
wow.
Essentially.
But I'm sure the interviewer, of course, was, good points. Yeah. That's extremely dangerous now, right?
And that's nothing. Because I remember you pointed out, it's, you have this woman making these dumb, very dumb statements, but she's doing it on a platform that I'm pretty sure reaches a ton of people.
Oh, yeah.
So now you have this person spewing this misinformation. Now, granted, it begs the question, anybody who really honestly believes the color of a firearm makes it more or less dangerous, we have bigger problems. but this notion that is who army, at least in America, that I've from my experience, they'll lend their ear to the opposite side of the argument all day long. Whether or not they're telling the truth, giving correct information, it doesn't matter. Here's our platform to use it. But then for people like you and I, when we want to go on there and actually give correct information and educate people and talk about these things, no, they want no parts of it. Or even if we do go on, it's not really a conversation. They're attacking us. It's like, how can I get you? And I'm like, wait a minute. I thought we were here to educate people. I didn't know we were here to verbally and intellectually spar. But I mean, hey, if you want to do it and get embarrassed, sure, let's do it. But, for me, I see that and I go, good God, like, who really, really wants to save lives here? Because like you talked about, you want to inform the people, you want to educate them, talk about the safety component, be more nuanced in trying to find ways to decrease the violence that is happening. And how do we go about doing that will be more effective than just creating laws on paper? But they don't want to have that conversation. So it begs the question, like, why not if you want to save lives?
I think there's an entire anti-gun lobby industry. I know in Canada, I don't exactly know how it works in the States, and contrary to popular belief with the anti-gun lobbies, we don't work with the NRA. They right in their constitution, it says they don't work in Canada. We do our own work. It's a completely different system. But I know in Canada here, the anti-gun lobbies can receive a lot of federal funding in the form of consultation fees. So they're consulting on, public safety matters or judicial matters, and they get these huge payments. And even we have a new lobby group in Canada, an anti-gun lobby. That's it's a small group but very loud, and they're doctors, right? So they're called the Canadian Doctors for Protection from Guns or something. Here we are in the midst of a global pandemic, a literal health crisis where people are dying all around the world, and they're running around doing interviews in their lab coats, talking about that we need more gun regulation. This latest mass killing is just evidence of that. The evidence is clear and overwhelming. And it's just mind-blowing because right now, as we speak, they're doing a syndicated CBC show. So CBC is our federally funded, like the taxpayers pay for it, media corporation. So when you do syndication, you get broadcasted in every major city across the country, right? So it's huge platform, huge audience. So I contacted the CBC ombudsman and I said, hey, listen, if we're going to jump the gun here, so to speak, and use this mass tragedy, this horrific crime that people are reeling from, to jump on on the soapbox and clutch our pearls and ask for more control on the legal gun owners, when we know for a fact he's not even a gun owner, a legal gun owner in Canada, I think we should have the ability to defend ourselves. He said my complaint would be heard and responded to within 20 days. 20 days from now, no one's even going to be talking about it.
Pretty much, yeah. And they know that, and which is why he said that. And you know, what's interesting is kind of like, God, it drives me insane when they do that. It's like they provide this kind of false authority. Like you say, they run up there in their lab coats or whatever the hell they wear, scrubs, whatever. And they get up there and talk about gun control. What the hell do you know about gun control? You're a doctor, right? Like it's a false authority. It's not a false equivalent. So it's, you know, we understand why they do it, right? It's done to take advantage of the overall ignorance that a lot of people have about firearms in this country. You know, like I've heard, it's interesting how I've heard the anti-gunners on the Canadian side of things try to leverage the so-called gun violence in America to make their point. You know, you know, they'll say, well, you know, because like I'm pretty sure that if we made the argument, well, this guy wasn't even legally able to own a firearm. How did he get it? Right. And they'll probably say something like, well, he either stole it or it came across our porous borders because the Americans have all the guns and there's nothing we can do because they keep coming from America. And it's like, in the next question, I go, well, see, here's the thing. The gun violence problem, first of all, I don't think you can compare Canada to America, period. I think it should never even be done as far as the gun issue is concerned. One, ideologically, we just have a very different history in terms of the way the country was formed. Two, you guys have what, maybe 32 million people, and then like you said about 36, and we have 300 million, and then on top of that you guys have what, like 21 million firearms and maybe 2 million gun owners, I think. Right. So from that perspective, in America we have 400 million firearms. So you take a population of that size, just bare minimum, people like to talk about, the rate, right? The gun violence rate, that's what matters, more accurate. And it's like, yeah, but it still doesn't account for the unaccountable variables, which is if you have a lot of people in one area, there are going to be more sociopaths in that area, period. In Canada, they have significantly less people. Therefore, you have less sociopaths. Therefore, less gun violence. Whereas in America, you have 300 million people. Therefore, you're going to have more sociopaths. Therefore, you're probably going to have more gun violence. And yes, we do have 400 million guns. But as I said before, the way the country was formed and established, that we have a Second Amendment right in this country. But yet and still, you look at what happened in Canada, and you have laws. You had pretty much all the laws that all of our anti-gunners salivate over. Like, they're just like, oh, yes, gun registration. We need to treat guns like you treat licensing for a car, like a driver's license, which is assuming that's what you guys have there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All of our restricted firearms, all my handguns and AR-15s are all registered. I have very strict, even transporting them. Mm-hmm. Like if I want to leave the house and go to the range, the law says I must take the most reasonably direct route. You don't stop at Walmart. Don't go to Burger King and get a burger. No coffee at Tim Hortons. None of that. You go straight to the range and straight back.
Jesus.
It's very strict.
But that's very indicative of what happens when you have a country where your leaders look at firearm ownership as a privilege instead of a right. Right?
Oh, yeah.
You know?
And this is the problem. When I comply with every regulation, every layer of law and rules that they put on me, and I comply with it all, no matter how ridiculous and ineffective it is, and I do everything they've asked me to do, and I follow it to the letter, and then some jerk, some psychopath goes and does something that is literally unpreventable.
Yeah.
Once again, that collective blame is going to be put on the shoulders of 2 million people who are sitting here locked at home in a virus saying, I had nothing to do with this, and now you're going to make me pay for it. Nope. Instead of looking at the root causes of why do people turn into extremists? Why are people violent? Was there some warning signs? Unfortunately, it's too late for what could have been, but you can always learn from things in order to avoid it. Absolutely. It's interesting. Yesterday, OPP, he's an ex-OPP commissioner, so that's a provincial police Force, Chris Lewis. He's a crime expert for CTV. And they asked him flat out, what could have been done to prevent this? I mean, of course, we don't have all the details yet. And he simply looked at the camera and said, you can't. You can't get into the minds of every single human being and figure out what they're doing. Unfortunately, you can't. And my thought on that is, you're right, you can't prevent it, but could it have been stopped along the way? Yeah. He had 14 hours of slaughtering.
And that's another thing that this is always a hard argument for me to make, because what I don't want to look like I'm doing is I'm criticizing what police do in their jobs. However, the reality is the reality. Gun control essentially is saying, you give us your firearms or restrict your firearms into oblivion, and we'll protect you. The government will protect you.
Yeah.
However, you had an individual who pretty much had an entire city on lockdown for 12 hours by himself. He wasn't a Navy SEAL. He wasn't some clandestine operator. Just a regular denturist with a firearm. Locked down the city by himself for 12 hours. I'm sorry. Reality tells me, yes, your intentions may be good, but you are only capable as far as you're limited as a human being. And I'm sorry, I'm just not going to put the entirety of my safety on another person or another entity that has demonstrated that they can't always be there. They just can't. So for me, yeah. And so it's like, I want my gun, because when I need the protection immediately, it's going to be there. Your cops aren't. Not because, I'm not saying that they don't want to be. I'm not saying that they're not doing their best to get there, but they just can't. So let me have what I need to have to protect myself. Now, I make that argument from a very American-centric standpoint. How well do you think that translates over to people in Canada, considering you all, like I said, they don't have the same perception of self-defense with the firearm as we do here in America?
Well, the tides are changing, though. I think, as things go on, people, there are bad people. Yeah. That sounds almost immature to say, but there are bad people. And we are seeing not just a rise in gang violence in our big urban cities, but in our rural communities. You look at the prairie provinces, Alberta and Saskatchewan, and the average wait time for law enforcement there is between an hour and a half and 2 hours. Even here in the city, it's 8 minutes. That's the average. That's pretty good. Yeah. I mean, that's if you're living right in the city, not on the suburbs. Yeah. But still, 8 minutes. If you think of a violent attacker alone with your daughter or your wife, what can he do to her in 8 long minutes? Yeah. And the more that we're seeing, there's been some instances out in the prairie provinces, especially in rural, farmlands and ranches, where that type of rural violent crime is rampant. People are going into farms and ranches. You've got the farm wife there all alone. They're attacking women. They're stealing things. They're killing people. And people are starting to fight back. We've had quite a few cases recently where people are like, that's it. And, sometimes the process is the punishment, going through the criminal justice in Canada. Yeah. You're automatically arrested, charged, you're assumed a criminal, and you're treated like one, and you're going to lose your home and everything you own fighting for your freedom. And hopefully the courts decide on your side, which they do sometimes.
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 Now, question. So, I'm a member of USCCA, which is essentially an insurance for self-defense. In the event that I had to use my firearm to save my life or something like that, they have lawyers on standby for me. They have a certain amount of money allotted for me to fight my case. Do you guys have something like that in Canada?
Yeah, so the CCFR has their own insurance program. Okay. With our membership alone, they're entitled to $5 million of personal liability insurance for if they're sued, if they're, damage someone's property or injure someone. But we're kind of in the middle of renegotiating our legal defense insurance. We did quite a few claims in the past, and with the shutdown and everything, you just can't seem to get anything done. So it's sort of on hold right now. But yeah, we do have an insurance like that. And literally you need it, because the average court case here can cost somebody between $40,000 and $60,000, even if they've done nothing wrong. Yeah. Yeah. So we're not lawyers. We're not cheap. No. Well, that's it, right? Yeah. I know. I worked for a law firm before here, and it's, it is big money. And unfortunately, in a case like that, you wouldn't want someone defending themselves or trying to bargain for their freedom on a budget.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
How much is freedom worth? So,
Yeah, you definitely. It's just. I mean, you're talking about your life and your livelihood at that point. Like you managed to save your life in one aspect, but then potentially have it destroyed regardless after you've
yeah.
done the very thing you need to do to protect your life. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that dynamic. And I think that's brutally evil, honestly. There's just the notion that, okay, I've been through one hell. Now you're going to subject me to another one simply because of what? Ideology based around a firearm ownership, or the idea that you see me as a criminal for simply having a firearm to protect myself. And again, it stands to reason. These laws only negatively affect you and I. It does nothing for the criminal. The criminal sidestepped the law. He didn't give a damn about the law. You were supposed to register, have your guns registered, and have a license to own a firearm. He didn't have one. He didn't care. He still did what he did, right? But you, on the other hand, you have to contemplate whether or not, I have people who are just like, well, then just don't do it. And you're right. You shouldn't have to.
10 years in prison if you don't do it.
And that's the thing. It's like, you shouldn't even be forced to have to make that decision. You shouldn't have to calculate, okay, do I want to protect my life in the event something happens, or do I want to risk possibly going to jail? Should I? Like, that to me is just evil. Good people, law-abiding people should not have to deal with that type of decision making. I should be able to pick up my gun, put it on my body, and go about my life the way I do on a regular basis. I shouldn't have to tell well, it's kind of sort of illegal to do this or carry this particular gun or have 6 rounds of my gun versus 5. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, I just like, come on, like, what are we doing? And
well, you're right. And the whole idea with gun control, the whole misconception is that it's got some relation to public safety, and it doesn't. I mean, there are credible things that we can do in this country to increase public safety, to cut down on, violent criminals and things like that. And unfortunately, here's the trick. Here's the whole key to why gun control is so successful as an election platform here. And it's because Canadians don't understand the reason why they don't do the credible work on crime is because it takes longer than one election cycle to see the positive benefit of that. Yep, exactly. You start investing in the inner city communities, get those kids off the street, give them some hope, give them somewhere to go after school, give them some tutorage. There's all kinds of programs, keep women safe, all these investments and community projects that they can do that would make a big difference. But you're not going to see that by the next election. You're not. Even if you did it right at the beginning of your mandate, in 4 years, you're not going to see the real benefits. You're not going to get the credit for it. And God forbid a politician does something right just because it's right and lets that, that possible credit for that positive action fall to the next guy. There's no way they'll do it.
Yeah. Nope, you're absolutely right.
Here we're keeping you safe, more gun laws.
Yep. And then the beautiful thing about their argument, and I mean beautiful in a very sinister way, is even if nothing changes, they'll say, well, we need more of it.
It didn't change because we didn't go far enough.
Exactly. Oh,
yeah.
And they can always ride on that. They can ride on that into the sunset of their glorious anti-gun universe. And it's insane to me. But you're right. You're absolutely right. People don't talk about that very much. Is the idea that there are ways to curb the violence, because as you pointed out, it's a pattern. It's the same thing everywhere. You, like in America, I tell people all the time, we don't have a gun violence problem in America. We have an inner city violence problem in America. Same way in Canada, as you point out, I don't have a gun violence problem in Canada. You have an inner city violence problem in Canada. Same thing in the UK. I've talked to someone who work essentially whether it's their SWAT team in the UK. It's like we don't have a gun violence problem or even a knife problem in the UK. We have a inner city violence problem.
Right.
And what is the main theme that's consistent in all of these places? Brutal poverty.
Brutal poverty.
That's
exactly it.
And so it's like, but like you pointed out, it's a lot harder and takes a lot longer to address the issues of poverty in a location in order to mitigate the poverty so as to mitigate the violence than it does to say, well, we're going to come into the city and we're going to have a heavy hand with these laws and we're going to pass gun control laws. And I want to go this far, but the stupid gun lobby won't let me. And so, and that's why things haven't changed for the last 10, 20 years. Like at least in America, some of these politicians these areas are democratically run and have been for decades, and nothing has changed. Nothing. And it's like, you've been pushing gun control as a way to change it for 20, 30 years, and nothing has changed. So please explain to me how gun control is the answer to this. It doesn't make any sense.
It's funny too, because a lot of the cities with the highest inner city urban gang type crime are all liberal run cities, and it's interesting to me, because you would think if the purpose here was really to save lives and really make that positive difference, I don't know, I'm just an average guy here, but I would say that I would do anything possible to make those changes. And when they keep, choosing political theater over positive changes, for generation after generation, and the voters just keep sucking it up and buying it, right?
Yeah, well, because it's easy though. You have to think about it's easy.
Sophisticated thinking too, and
the funny thing, really, it's also a very insidious financial bearing. So, for instance, when you talk about providing, tackling the poverty issue, right? People can see where the cost and money will come up front. Gun laws, you don't see it. They're there. You just don't see it up front, right? It takes money to implement a lot of these gun control policies. Like if you're gonna implement universal background checks, that means you're gonna have to have an entire system in order to handle this. That doesn't come free, right? You're gonna have to have the system in place to do that. But people think, oh, well, wait, so you mean to tell me we just say yes to you passing a certain law that bans a certain gun, and then all of a sudden all our problems are solved? Oh, sign me up, right? But wait, you want to do what? You want to start programs that start dealing with poverty, and actually, like, we have to roll our sleeves up and go and actually talk to the younger generation of people and kind of nurture them and groom them and do all of these things that are, yes, admittedly very difficult, and yes, very time consuming. Can we do the easy one, the one where we just sign a paper and say that the gun laws will fix everything? Let's do that one instead. And I think it's a huge disservice to the people in these areas, because even in America, when we talk about the inner city violence, you scale it down to say 5,000 feet off the ground. The vast majority of people in these places, they're just poor. They're not evil. They're not violent. They're just poor. It just so happens that there's an element in these, they're minority, but there's an element in these inner cities that are engaging in the vast majority of the violence. Right. And then, I've even talked to officers. They know exactly who these people are. It's not even like it's a mystery. Like, who's committing violence in these areas? They know exactly who they are. And so from that standpoint, it's not even the violence of the gun violence isn't even that widespread within the actual inner cities as far as the number of people committing the crimes. The same way as if you expand out and you start looking at 30,000 foot in America, there are very particularized areas, hot pockets in some of the major cities where vast majority of the gun violence is coming from. But yet we never allowed to break it down and discuss it on that level of nuance, because one, it forces us we have to think harder. And like I said, we could just sign a paper and just fix all the problems with gun laws. Oh, let's do that one. We don't want to do the hearts. Come on, Colion, Noir. You're getting off into the weeds. No, I'm trying to fix a problem. I'm actually trying to fix a problem. So it's unfortunate, but I mean, it's where we're at now. But then, we have people like you who are out there, utilizing the platform that they have to the best of their ability to push out the information, because as you stated, the more people know, the better. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a misconception that because I'm pro-gun, whatever that means, is that I'm anti-safety, and nothing could be further from the truth.
Right.
I'm a grandma, and I want to safer Canada too.
Yeah.
And it doesn't start by continuing to do the same exact ineffective crap we've done for decades.
Absolutely.
It's time for change.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that you want to kind of speak about or talk about or put out there for anyone looking for more information on what you guys do? Any way that they can help, anything of that sort?
Absolutely. You can find us at firearmrights.ca. Like I said earlier, we are about to launch this huge national education campaign, or at least a part of it, as much as we can do during the pandemic here. So keep an eye on the website. We've got a great podcast as well. You can find it at CCFR Radio. It's on all the podcast platforms. and we're on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. So
Awesome.
follow us, keep up to date with everything, and share.
Absolutely. That's very important. A lot of people, all you people who are watching this, you have to share the content. That's the only way we break the algorithm. That's the only way we get outside of them shadow banning us and taking the 2A content and just shoving it on a back shelf somewhere. You have to share the content. But thank you very much, Tracy, for joining me today and talking through some of the
Colion.
Absolutely. You're welcome back anytime. Yeah. So I wish you the best of luck. Man, you guys have it cut out for you. Y'all have a lot to do. And I'll help out as best as I can. Right now, there's a war against the Second Amendment, which is why I need your help spreading our message to counter their message. You can help do this by leaving a comment, sharing this video, and clicking the bell and subscribe button. Let my voice be your voice, and let them know you want to keep America tactical, because the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed wasn't a suggestion, it was a directive. Also, if you're wondering where to purchase your All Guns Are Essential, I Will Not Comply, I Am the Militia, I Lost All My Guns in a Boating Accident, and your state-specific Keep America Tactical shirts, click the link next to my head or the link in the description section, or if you're watching this on a mobile, tap the small triangle on the lower right-hand side of this video and click the link in the description section.